Good afternoon, everyone. This is another one of my mini president's videos. I think I'm up to about 80 videos now. Started this, wow, probably 10 months ago. I'm very excited about today's video. We're going to really get into some detail as it relates to goal 9.6. And specifically, we're going to talk about two of the key words in 9.6. One of them is compassion, which we've defined as attempting to understand the thoughts, emotions, and circumstances of others without conditions. And the second one is reflection, which we defined as pausing and thinking about one's thoughts and emotions before reacting. And I have with us today a friend at the college. She is a psychology professor, Elena Newman. She teaches 3 different psychology courses for SCC. We're very excited to have you here, Elena. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Elena is a particular champion of Goal 9. She brought it to my attention and asked to make a video on this topic. And specifically, she wanted to talk about how we can help our students. This is as we go through something like this where one of the strategies is to isolate ourselves to some degree. That creates a lot of challenges for everyone. And one of the things we like to do is we like to be around people, and we like to share. That helps us moderate. It helps us understand our emotions. It's very, very important that we have that. So Elena, talk to us about some of the things you do in your classes to help students who might be worried about themselves. Maybe they have some beliefs and thoughts are different than others, and that maybe they're struggling with knowing how to follow those thoughts and beliefs without feeling judged or afraid.
So in many of the classes that I teach, a lot of the things that we talk about is not only content areas, but we also talk about how to apply what they're learning to their everyday life. And I think that's important in any class because that creates a connection. And research has shown that if you connect what you're learning to your life, you're more likely to remember it. It's gonna be more salient to you. So one of the things we talk about is cognitive bias and the importance of addressing cognitive bias and the fact that we all have things that we've learned in our past. And the thing that I tell my students is that the goal of education is not to change your opinion, it's to give you options to consider. And then it's up to you to change your opinion. And so that's why we go to school, is to get a broader perspective. And sometimes that perspective can be uncomfortable because we have our own biases that we come into any environment with. And so so we talk about cognitive bias and the importance of that and how that makes us human. It's one of the biggest ways we learn is by challenging that bias and exploring multiple perspectives. The other thing we talk about is emotional intelligence and the importance of not only understanding your own emotions, but also understanding other people's emotions and being receptive to other people's emotions, because everybody has a different, again, perspective and different experiences that drive a lot of what they experience and a lot of their emotions when they come into any scenario.
So Elena, I know I was reading a book on the neuroscience of emotion, and one of the things it talks about is individuals have considerable variation in their emotional granularity. One individual may categorize emotions into 4 buckets. Another person may be able to feel 25 different types of emotions. So just the fact that you've got differences across individuals with the granularity of their understanding of emotion is challenging in terms of communication. But one of the other Goal 9 words I didn't include in this conversation this afternoon is transparency. And it's one of my favorite and one of the most challenging. And some of the things you're talking about are very relevant to this particular Goal 9 word, and it's transparency. And we defined it as accurate communication of information that is interpreted as intended. And because of the cognitive bias, I like to argue that it's very rare that anyone's actually fully transparent. What I mean by that is because, as you pointed out, we all have these different filters because of our experiences. And I think that if you're comfortable sharing, that one of the things that you had told me is that you do in your classes, you give them a little personal information about some of the things that maybe have created your own filters, and you kind of use that as a way to explain to them that, you know, even their teachers might have a backstory that they're unaware of, and it's a powerful way to sort of help the students to see how everyone can overcome challenges in their life. If you'd like to share a little bit of that, that would be great, but that's up to you.
Yeah, so a couple of different ways where I've shared my kind of story, and I do want to. My biggest thing with my students is to be on their level. I don't consider them above. You know, I don't consider myself above them. I want to be considered as their peer or as their kind of a. I want to be kind of their guide, so to speak. And in order to do that, you have to be on the same level. You can't be, that trust can be established if you're playing ranks. And so one of the things that I do is I do share personal information with them from, you know, my story. And that has happened a couple of times. And I am in healthcare. I am an educator. So I have career areas where they're very solid in terms of information. You know, we look at experts, we look at policies, we look at regulations, and that's how my world operates. And so one of the things that I constantly have to do in healthcare is kind of examine my own biases in terms of, you know, how do I approach, you know, X, Y, or Z, whatever topic that is. Understanding full well that people, again, come from different backgrounds, different opinions, different thoughts. I have shared different thoughts with other colleagues who have told me, well, I didn't think about it that way. And now that you've told me that, you know, I understand.
Sorry to interrupt, Elena. Do you have an example for us?
Yeah, so in class we were talking about defense mechanisms. And so one of the things that was asked of me is, well, how can someone repress something for so long and not realize that they're repressing it? So that kind of got us talking about like our current environment, what's happening right now. And I did share a personal struggle with my students about how defense mechanisms actually play in real life. And for me, when I was 4 years old, my family immigrated to the US from the former USSR. And we came here as refugees. So we were forced out of our country, our home, and we had to find a new home. We didn't have a lot. We just came here because we could either stay there and die or leave and live. Those were our two choices. And so it wasn't until this year, and I'm 36 years old. I don't mind disclosing my age, but I'm 36 years old, and until now, I didn't realize how much I have repressed the memories of what have happened, or what has happened, I guess. And so things that are happening in the environment right now are creating a lot of kind of highs and lows, and trying to understand. And before actually it was all happening, I didn't understand why I was having the highs and the lows. I didn't realize why my body was just uncomfortable. Like my heart rate would spike, and I wouldn't understand, well, why am I going through this? Like, what's happening to me? But then as I started kind of thinking back in history, I've connected the dots, so to speak. And it's all due to kind of the trauma of coming from there to here. And my biggest trigger, at least at this point, well, since the start of this, masks, is seeing masks on people. And the assailants of that time wore masks. So I have a really hard time with masks for that reason. I've had to explain to people that reason. I've had to elaborate on that reason, and I have elaborated with my students, and I've had a student who made a comment, well, I didn't realize until you told me. I thought it was just a piece of cloth. You know, what was so hard about wearing a piece of cloth? Now I understand.
So,
And so I consider that a success.
sure. So you're actually able in your class use a little bit of story about your background to show them in real time how a defensive reaction can happen and how repression can be a very good tool for, you know, being able to navigate life. But you can have triggers that can bring things that were successfully repressed right back up. And I know one of the things that I think is super important, and it's so important about Goal 9, is we want to create students, Elena, that are deep thinkers. And I think what you're describing is one way of really letting them see how to do that, is to go into a situation and be thinking that you don't really know the circumstances under how someone, related to how someone might be perceiving or thinking about something. In this particular case, for them, it might be a curiosity of why would a mask trigger? They never thought about that. And so the challenge is, like in your case, you've got the same challenge. You probably have to think, well, why wouldn't they think about that? Because that's such a trigger point for you. But I think giving, and that's not an easy thing to do. I know in leadership, for example, one of the best things you can do is show a little bit, there's a balancing act. If you're a little bit vulnerable, that can be very powerful as a leader, because it lets everyone know that you are approachable, that you are like them, and you do have struggles, and you can overcome them. So I'm sure in your class, it's a very powerful message to share with them that life has a lot of challenges, and you can overcome them and be quite successful. So one of the things that you had mentioned to me before we started this video was that you when you go to explain to people, that they usually pretty easily come around understanding, but just that process right there is really fascinating, because like I said, with transparency, we don't know what people's filters are, so we don't know what they're interpreting when they hear something. And so what else do you have to add to that in terms of how is that a learning tool for your students?
So it switches, and I think in the other video that you and I made, we talked about switching it from an emotional reaction to a cognitive reaction. And so I think from a standpoint of a student, when they see somebody that is doing something, for example, that's non-compliant or can be seen as non-compliant, when you talk to them about the reasons behind, yes, it puts you in a vulnerable position, but at the same time, for the student, it becomes less of an emotional response and it switches to a cognitive response. And that is when they start creating kind of sympathetic umbrellas or sympathetic networks within themselves to realize, well, if this person is going through this, the next time they run into somebody who's experienced something is going to be different, you know, and they're going to react differently to the next person that they come in contact with. So it's a learning experience. It's something that everybody kind of goes through. It goes through a phase of learning per se. But I think the initial reaction, we have to be very careful that we get off of the emotional reaction to whatever our own biases are, and be willing to open up to somebody and ask the questions that you're wondering, because it's much easier to ask the uncomfortable question than to make a judgment call and to stop that communication altogether.
Yeah, I think, with social media being such a powerful force, and such an present force, I think some of the things you're describing are extremely relevant in our current sort of environment. And going back to the word reflection, pausing and thinking about one's thoughts and emotions before reacting. And the way that's defined is the last word is really powerful, reacting. And I'm a huge believer in the importance of emotions. I think they have such a great role in making us human. I think recognizing them, letting them pass through you before you take action is really important. But that word reacting doesn't mean necessarily a behavior. It could be a judgment, a thought, a cognition that you're having about what you think you're seeing. That can be really difficult if you don't let it have time to pass through. And again, if someone saw that maybe you were not having your mask just the way maybe they have it on, they would have no idea why that may be the case. But I think teaching people how to be reflective thinkers and not engaging in judgmental action is so important, because often we just don't have a lot of information. So in your case, the observer would have very limited information, and you have a lot of information about what's going on. So I think, I'm a psychologist as well, Elena, and I think one of the things I love about being a psychologist is I get to practice my craft all of the time, especially as a president. I get to use it in how I communicate. So I think this is a great conversation about really trying to apply these techniques and create these wonderful reflective thinkers when we're educating our students, and go beyond, like you said, being aware that we have cognitive bias is extremely important. What else do you want to share about your journey in trying to get, because I think you've described it that way to me, that you see your sort of career as a journey, not just teaching these concepts, but really helping people embrace the concepts. And I think you told me you're one of the biggest champions of Goal 9 because you see that it's founded in solid psychological concepts. So I do remember you sort of seeing this more as a journey for you and a crusade in getting people to be open-minded and think in a reflective way.
Yeah, so I appreciate the kind of the premise of Goal 9 and the idea of it kind of adds humanity to an institution and to a building, to people in a building. It allows a kind of a human component into our everyday task-oriented workday. And I hope my biggest goal, I guess, in my life's journey is to create that awareness, create that communication, create that open communication, not kind of an aha, I got you kind of thing, but being willing to have the uncomfortable conversations that a lot of people try to avoid. And it's easier, again, it's easier to ask the question than to, say something that shuts down the communication altogether. Because you could learn some.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the idea of seeing, the idea of seeing your profession more as a journey in trying to make actual changes. I just thought of something, Elena. We actually have 3 things that so much in common. We're both psychologists. We both really like Goal 9, and we're both 36 years of age. That's unbelievable. And it truly is unbelievable because I'm not 36 years of age. I don't look 36 and I don't feel 36. So I'm a little bit, what is that called? Jealous of your age, but that's okay. That's not a good emotion to have, right? I guess it's okay to have, but I need to recognize it. This has been great. I appreciate that you really want to change the lives of not only your students, but of everyone you come in contact with. And I appreciate your passion for Goal 9 and your willingness to share some personal information about what makes this particular time so important for you to get these kind of messages out. So I think we're probably needing to wrap this up. Do you have any last sort of thought that you want to share?
No, I'm grateful that the college affords these kinds of opportunities. You know, there's not a lot of places that you can have, that I could have real conversations with students, and I'm thankful that I'm in front of students and I'm able to have these conversations. And in this case, I'm still educating. I'm educating not only in the classroom, but I'm educating outside of the classroom. And education is, you know, you can be an educator once you're an educator, you're an educator your entire life, whether, you know, regardless of what position you hold. And so that's kind of my mission. A lot of educators have put forth a lot of effort and time into me, and I want to pay it forward. And so that's what I do.
Well, thank you so much for making this video today, Elena. I think we had some excellent conversation. You know me, I always like talking about Goal 9 any chance I can get. So with that, why don't we wish everybody a wonderful holiday season that we have coming up here.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll say see you later, everyone, and thank you for watching this video. Thanks, Elena.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.